And I love that Nathan timed it for that to catch it. All right. Well, Andrew, according to the book, the apostle of the small things, or of small things. So the first question I'm going to ask everybody is, what kind of stood out or was the most meaningful thing that you learned from that chapter? And I will kind of start going through the list. But the first person I'm going to call out is Eric.
Okay.
Go for it.
No, somebody else want to go?
I guess I didn't even really, I don't think I ever knew much about Andrew at all. And he, it just seemed like he was kind of there, but wasn't there. I mean, it seemed like the other ones all took over him. I don't know. That's the way I felt about it. I mean,
I think what I got from this was how he knew nothing was too small to take to God.
yeah.
And take everything to God. And man, what a lesson in what we all need to do every day.
Yes.
And I was thinking about how he was kind of behind the scenes all the time. And you look at any church, like our church, there's so many people that do things behind the scenes,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And,
That's what I thought too.
that's what I thought about when I was reading that. I thought there's a lot of people are behind the scenes, even though they are bringing maybe people in one at a time. That was the other thing I saw, that he didn't bring mobs of people in. He would invite a person. I thought that was kind of neat too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Andrew is my new hero among the disciples. He's one of the inner circle. He's a major contributor, yet he doesn't hog all the glory. Very quietly.
In case y'all missed Deborah's comment, it was, unfortunately my phone will not let me be heard, but she's here. Andrew was a gatherer. He introduced so many people to Jesus behind the scenes.
I'll chime in, because everything you guys said was so true. The other thing, if you remember when I asked back in the day about how did you think Andrew felt being kind of left out of the structures of, and the thing that I kind of get out of it and reading it, especially when you hear him finding the boy that had his lunch basically, and it fed 3,000 or 5,000. I apologize, probably more. That Andrew was up in the crowds. He didn't. To me, he was the guy that was, interacting with anybody and everybody one-on-one. He always was in, not necessarily in the 12, but he was the one that was out there already talking, hearing the pulse of what was going on. And that's why I relate to him, because I'm everywhere. And yet, I hold true to my faith. And I love him because he's out there, he's talking, he's communicating, and he's finding those one-on-one connections. And so that's what always touches me with Andrew and reading this. So.
One thing that I found interesting was, I know fisher persons probably didn't make a lot of money back then. And I thought it was kind of interesting how they went on sabbatical, John the Baptist. And I just thought to myself, how did they afford to do that?
Well, they owned a business of fishing, so it wasn't just they weren't necessarily just fishermen, but it doesn't really go into detail on whether it was the four of them with the father or if they had other workers.
Yeah.
So it's possible that they kind of had a fishing enterprise of sorts, or a little bit of something going on.
Do we know anything about Andrew and Peter's dad or parents?
I've never read it. You never hear much about their parents that
So-
I ever remember reading.
So we really don't hear anything about parents, except for some of them are named of like James and John, the son of Zebedee.
Yeah.
So that's an instance where we assume that Zebedee is perhaps still alive and even still around. However, more often than not, you would introduce yourself as your name, son of, and then your parents, or at least your father. It would be very similar to why we have so many Johnsons and Larsons and kind of along those lines. For the most part, though, we really don't hear about the disciples' parents. And again, these are, I don't want to say that they're lesser men, but they're not affluent. They're not very well big in standings or anything along that line. So there wouldn't be much record of them in history, really.
And that's also how you got your surnames back then, correct? How you were referred was, I was born, or I'm the father of. That's really your surname. There wasn't really much as a surname back then. So, like, Needabits wouldn't be around. It would be the son of Eric, or I'm the son of Rick or Richard. That wouldn't be the name. So that's why we also see the reference of that, of the inheritance. But we do know that it says it in here that they actually grew up somewhere else and then moved into this place. I'll find it.
They grew up in Bethsaida, moved to Capernaum.
Bethesda.
No.
Thank you.
Mhm. Well, the one thing that I learned from this chapter was that James and John and Peter and Andrew had come from being disciples of John the Baptist. Thinking that this was all happening at the same time. It was a question I had written down. But that makes a lot of sense. They were already orientated into being a follower and being learned about religion in that day. And I'd also like to add that when I go back to my hometown, people will ask me, especially the older people, whose daughter are you?
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because then you have to go ahead and explain that you come from my father's name was Paul and his father's name was Joe, and then they know who I am.
Kimball, looks like you're about to say something or have been trying to.
Oh, I haven't been trying to. We all get plenty of time. So, I couldn't help thinking when I was reading this chapter again, how little I really know in the real basic Bible stories. And I shared in my small group today, I said, at this point, I asked questions during the Chosen about the authentic relationship in the words that we were saying, or whether it was artistic license. And if there's somebody out there that's smart enough to read the Bible and come up with what we're reading in this book, I need to know them, because this is really mesmerizing. Getting into the peculiarities and the interpersonal relationships and the different interactions. I couldn't help but thinking about Andrew. To me, that's the epitome of evangelism. It's one thing I do remember growing up the scary part is, they want us to go out there, and they always say, we don't mean knock on doors, but we want you to go out and evangelize. And that's what he did. And I thought about the fact that he made it personal. He didn't go to a group and say, hey, this is cool, come with me. He came up to Karen and said, Karen, I want to show you something. Take him by the hand and take him there. It was, a real personal relationship. And I'm amazed that he doesn't have more of a presence in the Gospels. It's stated that he really is only mentioned a few times and stuff. He's instrumental. He brought the first one in. And I was thinking when we were talking about the parents, I don't want to sound crass, but I'm starting to think that, maybe I'm really slow in the uptake, but, the Bible is here to teach us something, and it's not a history lesson. So if you have a particular personality, their lineage doesn't always really matter. It's who they are and what they're doing. So maybe that's why in some cases we have the blanks behind them, because they want us to focus on this person and not their past or where they came from. Where some of them, we need that to make the analogy of why they're doing something. But anyway.
Well, on top of that, these are the writings of people, of men who, what stood out to them? What do they remember the most? And what do they take away from it? So by reading the Bible with that in mind, we're really learning what the 12 disciples learned from Christ personally. And that kind of can help break through what does this mean to, oh, now I know what he learned, and now I know what he's trying to say.
And I'm going to chime in a little bit too, going on that, because I think this is a really interesting point. Because I believe exactly what Kimball was saying, but also the Holy Spirit, these holes is where we get to start asking those personal questions, those questions that is so needed to grow in Christ, is not just, taking it bare minimum, but really asking questions to start moving forward, is in those holes of, wait, what is that? Is it that? Or do I need to focus more on this? Or it's the start of a question. And when a start of a question happens, the Holy Spirit can come in and influence you and move you closer to God. And that's something that I love about the Bible, is those moments.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, 2 points I was gonna make. They were all on the page 64. Both of them are on page 64. And the first is, I'm gonna just read the sentence, because both of these struck me. First of all, it said, Andrew may be a better model for most church leaders than Peter, because most who enter the ministry will labor in relative obscurity, more like Andrew as opposed to being like Peter. And I think that has to do with anybody being, not just being a pastor, but being, a follower. We're going to be more like Andrew, many of us. But then I think because through this, they kind of talk about Andrew as being laid back or not being as bold. In the next paragraph, halfway through, it kind of clarifies Andrew's personality for me. It says, make no mistake, he was bold, decisive, and deliberate, and nothing about him is feeble or wimpish. He was driven by a hearty passion for the truth, and he was willing to subject himself to the most extreme kinds of hardship in pursuit of the objective. Because sometimes I think when you think of people who are more laid back or maybe not a follower, you think of them as being mild-mannered or not being decisive, And this states that was not Andrew. Andrew is bold. He's decisive. He just goes about it in a different way than Peter. Those two lines really struck me.
Exactly. And who did they go to? Based on what you just said, who did they always go to when they needed something done? It was always Andrew. Yeah. I forget who said it. I think it was Jim. He's my new hero.
All right, so next slide, Eric. Now I want to iterate a couple moments or a couple things real fast with the timeline to point out.
Sorry.
Not at all. So his first mention is in the book. Actually, the only time he is mentioned on his own is in the book of John. Otherwise, he's mentioned in Luke when the naming of the 12, and Mark, he's named with the other three core disciples, Peter, James, and John. Otherwise, it's John who mentions them, and only John. But he's there in chapter 1, verse 29, when John the Baptist calls on him, or calls out, there's the Messiah. And it's the two of them, John and Andrew, who run off to follow. So remember, he's there at the very, very beginning. He then spent the rest of the day with Jesus, being taught to, having a conversation. He then goes and finds his brother, gets and pulls him in. And at that point, he kind of drops off into obscurity behind Peter's loud brashness until the feeding of the 5,000. And again, looking at that timeline, that's 5 chapters later, where he brings that young kid and says, here's 5 loaves of barley and some 2 small fish. As we remember, if we were when earlier, it mentioned that one of the main fish was sardines. So there's a good chance it was 5 loaves of barley bread, small little things, and 2 sardines that fed 5,000 men, not including the women and children, all of them till they were full. That was Andrew doing a small thing, big conclusion.
Right.
And to think we worry about having enough food at a potluck.
Yeah. That's true.
Or going a little deeper, that our small actions that we do aren't making a big impact. Our own kindness that we are sharing to others, I've struggled with this lately, going, I'm not doing enough. And really, if I focus on the little things, I am, because I'm creating a wave.
Yeah.
Now, the next time Andrew is given any kind of moment by himself is actually John 12, verse 20. It's right after the triumphal entry, where where Philip brings the Greeks to him, and then together they introduce the Greeks to Jesus. And we, of course, know that right after the triumphal entry, there's Last Supper onward. So the few moments that we can see him really are the beginning, really the first, what I consider big miracle, like mind-blowing one, and then right before the end. He's then mentioned again as being with the disciples and returning, and being with them when Christ shows himself after the resurrection. But again, not by himself. Those are the big moments. That's the timeline kind of locking it in. And as I said, he's really only mentioned in John. And I'm going to come back to that into a second with the next slide. And say that, think about that core group dynamic. We've talked about Simon Peter now. We're waiting on James and John. But we know that core group was always arguing about who is number 1, who was going to sit at the right hand or right and left, who was, prominent. They were loud, they were bold. All of them wanted to be that leader. But now we see Andrew, and he's not that. He's quiet. He seems shy. He's kind of unassuming, where people forget to mention him. And then he's also kind of thoughtful, I think, with the sense of he kind of got that realization, and I'm pulling it from the feeding of the 5,000. It's the, oh, we need food. Here's food. Yeah, it's not much, but this is Jesus. Unlike his, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think his shyness was a very bold shyness, though.
Yes. Well, that's not to say that being shy or quiet doesn't mean you're not bold. It just maybe means you're not your brother who's loud and obnoxious. I don't know what that's like at all.
Careful, Scott. He's presenting, don't forget.
Remember, I think we're doing John next. James.
James.
Well, then I'll have to apologize when we get to John. But when you look at that group dynamic, it doesn't really sound like Andrew. And that's what made me think, when reading this again, that maybe what it really is Simon Peter getting into arguments with James and maybe John, the sons of thunder, and Andrew kind of backing him up in that brotherly support, leading to that 2-on-2 fighting that we see all the time. I'm sure Eric would attest, I know I can, that whenever I need his help, he jumps in, whether it's an argument or just day to day. And I'd hope Eric would say the same thing to me, or about me. But it's not always our brightest moments. We definitely trip and kind of fall as we get passionate. But as Eric said, he kind of sees himself as an Andrew, so do I. Even though you can look at our personality traits and say, we're not the same. We are both bold, brash. We have our moments of being kind of crazy. But we both see an Andrew in us. I would guess that most people here would probably say that they see an Andrew in us, or in them. Somebody who does work in the background, who doesn't want to go stand up in front of everyone and give a giant speech. Or as Eric mentioned last week, doing even the Bible study kind of scares him a little bit, because that's not his style. That's not who he is. But that's a dynamic in that core group. And my question on it is, did Jesus treat him differently as a result? Did he understand Andrew's personality, do you think? And if so, how did he change it? How did Jesus relate to Andrew versus the Thunder Brothers and his brother, Simon Peter? What do y'all think?
Well, I think Andrew was like the first disciple, really. He was the one that introduced Peter to Jesus. So he was like the introducer of everything. And what's so interesting about him, too, at the end, they were talking about how he's the patron saint of Russia and also of Scotland. And I thought that was interesting, because he did a lot more missionary work, obviously, if they thought of him that far away. So I just thought he was really the first disciple, not Peter, because Andrew was the first one to follow Jesus. So.
And it always seemed like Andrew kind of got it. He understood what Jesus was about, whereas Peter had to constantly be corrected.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that too, Jim. I feel like exactly what you just said, but and it kind of brought home how he understands all of us and our personalities and our strong points and our weak points and everything we do.
The thing
And-
that
I thought
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the one thing that I found interesting, I didn't really know, was that he was a follower of John the Baptist first, and then it was because John pointed out Jesus and said that's the Messiah there, that he just left and went, okay, that's where I need to be. I mean, he just immediately went. And obviously he believed because of he went and got his brother and said, come and see who I've met.
Well,
And
unfortunately,
it says on page 73 that Andrew seemed instinctively to know that he was not wasting Jesus's time.
A deep thought for me to know that Jesus knew everything beforehand. So everything he did was calculated to teach something. He didn't have to work with Peter. Peter could have been just right, but he set it up where he had to work with Peter to change him. I'm not sure why, but I think I'm going to take the take that, as people have been saying here, Andrew knew from the get-go that this was the Messiah and this is where I need to be. And he brought his brother in as the first, and Jesus said, I don't have to work with you. You know what you're supposed to be doing. So he kind of got relegated to the back burner because Jesus didn't have to teach him and lead him and tutor him. He could go about and do what he was supposed to do.
well, my takeaway kind of on it is the only interaction we see between Jesus and Andrew by themselves is the very beginning. Sitting down, just Andrew and John and Jesus, back wherever Jesus is staying, and have a conversation. A quiet, just small, intimate conversation. And that kind of seems to set the tone for everything Andrew. But that tells me that Jesus also understood Andrew, understood that maybe it was the quiet one-on-ones. And I can almost imagine that Jesus made a point of sitting down at the campfire with him and having those conversations. Where maybe some of the other disciples were not really inclined to those smaller, little intimate moments, wanted to run out and do things. And as a result, they had to be kind of brought in and taught in a different way. Because I know one-on-one conversations, especially a tutoring session, usually teaches you a lot better than sitting in the auditorium of 300 students at college or 5,000 on the side of a mountain. And that's, go ahead, Eric.
Well, just kind of piggybacking what you're saying is the thing while everybody's talking that I've been thinking about is, one, remember the moments that we don't have written down, which is kind of what Scott's talking about, of those moments of when they're sitting at the campfire or as they're traveling, every little moment. So one, we don't know, and we can imagine that interaction, but at the same time, I don't think Andrew cared if he was number one or wasn't. What Andrew cared about was that moment of the introduce, of let me bring you to Christ. And I think Andrew had his flaws. He probably did debate that, hey, I brought Peter and he did all this, or I brought, but Andrew was about that one-on-one interaction. So I don't know if why everybody else is debating, he would look at the person and be like, I'm awkward about this. Jesus, can we go have a conversation? Or can we have a moment? Or maybe I'm going to walk away and go talk to the person that nobody else ever talks to, the leopard that everybody forgets about because nobody wants to look at him. He went and said, no, you actually matter. And my master wants to meet you, and let me introduce you. Like, that's what he was doing. And so I never thought, hey, he would be lonely or anything like that. He was going out and searching for that lost soul that felt so lonely that they needed that connection.
So I'll chime in here real quick and just say, when Andrew is, I'll say, more quiet, more shy, and maybe a little bit more thoughtful, while his brother was out there in the podium, he was probably able to be approached, to be able to ask questions, to really engage, and really help people wrestle with their questions to the point where then they could maybe even make that decision of where they needed to go next, of maybe they just needed to hear this message for this moment, this time in their life. Maybe they were ready then to come around and be one of his disciples later on, or another follower in some capacity, whatever title we want to give that to him. And also, too, he was just simply wanting people to hear and simply the good news that the Messiah was here. And he was actually standing right in front of you. And sometimes we need someone to sit with us in that and hear that message. And sometimes we do need that loud, boisterous person to make us feel all fired up and ready to go. And yet sometimes we just need someone there to sit with us and say, I know this isn't easy and there's a lot of questions, but we need to think about these and let's talk about them.
Yeah. It's, I think if all of us think back to who really taught us, as the book actually points out, if we think about who brought us to Christ, how we learned, it tends to be that one-on-one. It tends to be somebody who really made an impact in our lives. And even choosing a church, choosing best friends, joining a group, it's, hey, I've got some friends. You want to come meet them? That's how I met my best friends multiple times throughout my life. And without it, if y'all don't know, I'm actually really quiet and I have a small group of friends, a kind of core group that I've had or know. All of them I've met through a friend I already had, through somebody that I'd built a long relationship with. And Andrew proves God has a plan for that too. We got the bold, we got the boisterous, we got the guy who can stand up and preach and convert 3,000. But that does not mean that the one-on-one is not as important, because again, without Andrew, that 3,000 preaching would not have happened right after Pentecost. And the Bible, or the book, uses Moody and the Kimball. I actually don't really know either of them, but just a quick read and it's, okay, that good example. I don't know it, but then it actually made me go back to thinking about like childhood and some moments of, in middle school, I had a teacher who called me by my older brother's name the entire class. Eric knows, because when after I left, Eric had that same teacher and she called him by my name. No, by Chris. Okay, by older brother. I followed in Chris's footsteps pretty much for now, middle school all the way through high school. Same schools, a lot of the same teachers. And they would always go, oh, you're Chris's younger brother. Oh,
Yeah.
he was this and that. And oh, how's he doing? Or in that one instance, that teacher's instance, it was always mistaking me for him. you sometimes feel kind of lost behind the scenes. But once you figure out that's your role, that's who you are, and that it's not any less, you become a very, very powerful tool for God and in the world. You know, your best friends will always say, oh, this is the person that's always there. They're the one that I can talk to. It's the small things that add up to the big, which goes to the next slide.
So before we actually go to the next slide, because you put it up here, Andrew, because you put up the X, which is one of his symbols. The other symbol is actually the anchor, which I find very interesting because he is the anchor. He's kind of the anchor of the group. But yeah, so he was the X because of his death, but also the anchor. So, and now to the next slide.
Now, I've left this empty for a couple reasons, but I'm hoping we can kind of talk about what are small things that we can or do that would add up to the big. I'm going to not necessarily brainstorm, but examples from y'all about daily life, about church, about evangelizing Andrew style, not Peter style.
I think Kimball is a prime example of that by evangelizing with all of his customers one-on-one every time he goes to a new customer. He's the biggest example I can think of.
Customer, it's really every single person. You know, I mean, he said he's. Let's see if it'll actually pop up or if it doesn't. I have experimented and failed.
It does not.
Okay, so we'll have to jump here. Thank you, Eric.
That looks good.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, that looks good. But I was also thinking just, parenting kids. It's full of small things every single day. And, but then after 20 years, they're off, they're independent, and they're doing their thing.
Yeah. And it's the small things that moms and dads do that add up to making functioning adults, more or less. There's the teachers and friends and pastors and other things that are kind of there, but
Careful what you say. Mom's a watching.
I actually really like that idea, Deborah, the writing on notes to people. Handwritten notes.
I always believe.
Sorry.
No, go for it. You first.
I got one of Deborah's handwritten notes, and it meant the world to me and boosted my week. And also kind of convicted me that I should be doing the same thing. But yeah, she is watching her talk.
I was going to add that sometimes I get texts from different people. Sometimes they're from the congregation, sometimes they're others. And inevitably, so many times they come on days when I just really need that text. I really need somebody to reach out. And I have to assume that that's a God moment where God is sending somebody to just send me a kind message, but just to reach out. And this day and age, it's texting, could be a phone call, but just reaching out to check on somebody.
Yeah.
Birthdays and stuff. I was thinking of Lorraine with all her birthday cards and all those other ones. And you don't all of a sudden there's a little card from Lorraine. I think that is so sweet. Get remembered for your birthday or anniversary or whatever, and I think that's really neat.
She absolutely does do that.
Now, here's a little bit of a laugh because I get about 3 of them a year from you. because apparently in the database of the church, I have 3 birthdays. So
One of these days we'll get that straight. He really only has one.
So actually, the funny thing is Lorraine, I get an amazing same age. No, I continue to become older every
I think
birthday.
she's asking if all the 3 from that year are all the same, or if it's
Oh,
actually
yeah.
like.
It's really amusing because it's like my birthday's in June, and I get one I think in September. One's coming up in like the end of October, and like I don't know how it happened, but I got 3 birthdays in the database, and every year it's like the boost of like, oh, I got a card. Like I don't know what happened, but it really does boost my love of like, I got a letter today, and it wasn't a letter of, oh, it's a paycheck or something else. It's somebody that actually cares about me. And so I wanted to piggyback on that. The other thing is planting small seeds and understanding that the next person that will come by will either water it or something like that. AKA, I'm always trying to plant a seed and not a mountain. That would be my little thing.
So, Eric, when is your birthday? I need to update the church directory.
Assuming we're not recording.
June 12th will be my birthday.
June 12th.
What is it?
I will add something else here, and partly because, of course, you all know that we've had a tough summer, but when we came back, so many of y'all pitched in. You brought us meals. You sent me cards. It makes a difference.
It does. Yes, it does. I know that feeling.
All right. Anyone else? Oh,
Y'all are loved.
do what?
I said, y'all are loved.
So I'm going to ask a couple other questions. What was the last time you asked somebody, how are you? It actually meant, how are you? Not a greeting. Not just to a friend, but a stranger or coworker. Last time we didn't get angry when somebody cut in traffic. Or cut in traffic when it's actually traffic, or let somebody merge with us.
I had I had to make a phone call today to correct a wrong, and it wasn't my wrong. I was wronged, and I went into it right away, not blaming the person that I was talking to, that I knew was going to correct it for me, but then ended up getting in a very personal conversation with her, just because just she's in Arkansas, and I asked how the weather was there and how she was doing, and are you working from home? Are you having to go in, and just all that? And she told me at the end of the conversation, I made her day. I made mine too.
It's good.
I mean, we forget about those, how powerful those little act of kindnesses are. We forget how much they impact us in those moments. And therefore we forget how, if we do those things to others. So I don't know if you guys remember that we were doing at the church, and we're still kind of doing it, an action a week. And the first action was call 3 people. Somebody you love, somebody that you haven't talked to in a long time, and then I don't remember the other one, but like those were those little moments and reminding us to do those things. And like my mom mentioned, all the stuff that's been going on with our lives and the missing of my brother. I had a friend call me that I hadn't talked to in over 20 years. He was my best friend growing up. Haven't talked to him in years, but he found my number and called. and how much that actually meant. And we can do those moments if we just took the time. And we always think that, oh, they don't want to hear from us or anything. But if we listen to each other, how much those moments actually matter, maybe we can do it a little bit more or try a little bit more and, bring somebody else's life up just a little bit and our own, because it's not just them that's being impacted, it's us. The other one that I always find interesting that I try to do is in a fast food restaurant line, I try to pay for the person behind me, because it's so simple, and it's that act of kindness of putting it forward of, if I did this, not even if I do this, that something miraculous will happen, but I just want that person to smile, and maybe they'll make somebody else smile. And it's so small and so simple, but that's what we're really called to do, is those simple little actions, and it creates that ripple effect to make something big.
Well, and I was actually going to mention, or ask when was last time somebody let a person at the grocery store cut in front of them who had 1 or 2 items in the basket instead of our full basket. Same mentality, Eric. Yeah, it's the pay for the person behind you, let somebody cut in line who obviously needs a hurry, or has that screaming kid, even though their basket is full, and maybe they just are trying to get home where they can take care of the kiddo. Doesn't matter if you stand there for an extra 5-10 minutes.
Here's the other side real fast. And this is something to think about. When did you not do it? When could I have done it? And actually think about that in moments, after moments, because that's really how we learn, is going, oh, I could have done that, but next time. And if we start thinking it now and reminding each other of those moments and going, hey, you could have done this a little differently and brought joy instead of not, and reminding each other of those little moments. Sorry, Scott, I didn't mean to jump in.
No,
That's good.
You're right. It's when did we not act as Christ called us to? No.
Well, I just thought of another small thing. Barbara Olson used to always say that when somebody cut her off in traffic, or she saw crazy drivers on the freeway or whatever, she would bless them. And I always think that is something that, instead of cursing at them, which you would like to do sometimes, you got to stop yourself. She would bless them. And so now I've learned how to do a little blessing on them as they go by, because it's a lot better than going nuts and screaming at them, because it doesn't do any good. They probably never know I do that, but that's okay. They're getting their little, you're okay.
Hey, remember the ripple effect, it doesn't have to be known. It will still ripple to them.
In my sobriety, coming out of a drug and alcohol-induced coma of many, many years, I realized that I was a very highly thought of, at least in my own mind, instructor. And I have now come to see, like we're all alluding to, that if somebody, they don't do it to me. If they do something in traffic, some of them might just be butts, but I try to look at the fact that I don't know what's going on in their life. They may have just gotten news that somebody was in an accident or their mother died and they're rushing somewhere. And so I'm trying to treat them with a little bit more compassion than anger at what I perceive that they did to me. But I don't want to win the race. I just want to be in front of everybody on the road.
Hey,
So
if you want to be first, you got to be last. I'm just saying.
Right.
That's a joke. Sorry.
Putting a tag on to what Susan said, if you see an ambulance or the police or some type of emergency vehicle, somebody's in distress. and you just say a little prayer for them, to bless them, to give them peace, to give them healing.
Yeah. And I think thanks to COVID and the whole world's kind of having to shut down for a time. I don't know about y'all, but I know that early on, even now, it's that I miss some of those small interactions, the day-to-day ones. Didn't realize how important they were to me. Just even hearing a best friend say hi, or being able to, see your family, who happens to live in a different house than you, so you don't get to see them on a day-to-day. It's the little things out of major conclusions, or small things with a little bit of faith can make some big changes, can make some miracles. We need to do the small things and trust that God's going to do, the faith part. So that kind of ends everything I have except for that last slide. To remind everyone that Andrew was, at least from what we're reading on him, he was an introvert. He was quiet, maybe a little bit shy. He wasn't that bold and brash. He was an introvert. But we also see that every single time that he makes an appearance, he was a counselor. He was talking to them one-on-one, bringing the Christ, showing them the good news. And I think it is kind of fitting that when you look at the Christian myth about him, the after the Bible, what happened to him, they talk about he went to Russia, Scotland. There was actually one book I read where there's somebody wrote a 1,000-page book on where he went, traveled, and he basically traveled the world and lived to 200-300, maybe still around traveling. We don't know. But when you really look at the fact that nobody really knows what happened to him, kind of just really ties into who Andrew was. And we should kind of remember that that's who we kind of need to be too. The not always trying to make the grand gestures, not always trying to be the center of attention. Sometimes give somebody else the credit. Sometimes just kind of sneak in there and be that good Samaritan and not the guy preaching on the street corner.
And on top of that, knowing his death at the very last, even in your worst moments, giving it up to the Lord and telling people of, hey, it's okay. Be thankful, be loving, be, all those moments. Even in your worst, he was sharing God's best, even at his worst.
So right before we do the Lord's Prayer, I am going to actually assign homework this week. What I want y'all to do, aside from read, is next time you're in that moment where you could make a small thing a good experience or a bad for somebody else, make it a good thing. As many times as you can.
Also, before we do the Lord's Prayer, did everybody get my email of me and Scott's info? Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I apologize that I sent it out late. Is there anything else that you guys would like us to share for more information or anything in that matter? Basically one of our slides or anything else that you guys would like to see.
I think you're doing a good job.
Thank you.
I really like this book.
We have talked about kind of collaborating, me and Scott and Pastor, of getting other reading material in a Word document or something like that we can start sharing. So like, for instance, if you wanted more information about the leadership of Peter, one of the books that I would recommend would be the seven, what is it? The Way of the Shepherd is what it's called. And it's a leadership book and bringing you to all of those factors, websites or anything. Would you guys be interested of me trying to kind of put that together and share it to everybody? So basically there are other things that I've been reading, other resources that me, Pastor Scott, and you guys can share too, of things that help inspire us to go even further. For instance, Peter, with him being the leader that he was, if you wanted to go into more detail in that leadership, there's a great book that's called The Way of the Shepherd, which is very different, but also very, it's exactly what he does. And if you would be interested in me creating a document with those kind of things, so that way we can add on and share.
Sort of like a book list with a little synopsis of each book, so we could kind of go through and maybe pick something. I think that'd be good.
Yeah, and also websites and stuff like that. So anything. Okay, I'll start working on that, and that way anybody that wants to jump into something a little more, start to go more in depth in something we can do.
Eric, when did you send the email? I don't think I got it.
I sent it, I believe, Sunday. I've been kind of running a little ragged. I have 3 companies pulling at me right now, so things get a little crazy. But if you didn't get it, I'll try to resend it either this evening or tomorrow.
Okay.
Teresa, I can forward you mine too. I'll make a note.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And that way, basically that one has my information, Scott's information, and also the slide with all the this slide that's being shown. Because I know you guys all asked for this slide, so I made sure that I sent it out to you guys.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I don't have it, so.
Okay, we'll that's what I wanted to make sure that we got it to everybody. So knowing that there was 2 that didn't get it is good for me.
Okay.
All right. Then if y'all will join me, I'll lead the prayer. Our Father,
Who
art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you.
Love all of you.
And remember, don't just do the good things. Don't sweat the small stuff either. Forgive those.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Lord's Prayer, the forgive us our trespasses, we forgive those who trespass against us, made me go like, oh, probably should comment that. Right.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank
Great
you.
job. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Love everybody.
Okay. Have a good rest of the week.
You too. All right.